in the pro wrestling community. This is the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. We're talking today about a couple of news items in the world of sports entertainment and pro wrestling that I think you'll find interesting. So we'll talk about them today. You'll comment about them in the comment box below, and we'll all have a good time. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys that this being YouTube, YouTube's algorithm just loves like buttons. So if you take your little finger and you go over there and you click that like button, and while you're down there, you might as well hit the subscription button if you're not subscribed already, and the notification bell so you know when I have new videos out there. You will help the YouTube algorithm be able to let other wrestling fans know about this video. It does help out the channel. I definitely appreciate it very much. And now let's get into today's news. I should say news with commentary because it's not really news. I talk about news, so it's really commentary and opinion and op-ed, but whatever. So one of the things that happened this past week is that Kenny Omega was talking about the Riho match against Britt Baker on the Saturday edition of AEW's Battle of the Belts, and he was praising it on his Twitter account. You guys know how I feel about Twitter. And the amazing thing happened. He got trolled a lot. I spent about 2 minutes looking this up, and I saw everything about people talking about his sexual identity. Kenny Omega's bi, from what all we can tell. He's never really sat down and talked about it too much, but we can kind of, the impression is he's bi. He's not 100% straight, whatever. People are talking about that. People talking about him and Marty Scurll. People talking about him having an Asian young underage girl fetish and really stating things as facts that are not facts. Saying that him and Rio's got that position because of him, and God knows how many other things. And then Kenny fired back at a couple people, and then he's like, I don't know why I just can't say that I enjoyed a match without it turning into this kind of a thing. And this is a larger problem with the wrestling community. Doesn't matter if it's Roman Reigns, doesn't matter if it's Seth Rollins, doesn't matter if it's Will Ospreay, doesn't matter if it's Kenny Omega, doesn't matter who it is. Big Swole, doesn't matter. If you post something and you're a public figure, and this goes beyond wrestling, on Twitter, on social media, there, unfortunately, over the last 10 years has been this growing, and disgustingly growing number of people who think that the internet is just their personal crap ground, where they will go and find anybody who is a figure who is more popular, more accomplished, more successful than they are, clearly, because nobody knows who these people are. It's just a big group of people, and maybe that's the key. But just crap on them. If you're talking about Betty White passing away, inevitably somebody's going to come in and call Betty White a terrible name. If you're talking about how great you think, depending on your political beliefs, Joe Biden is or Donald Trump is, somebody's going to have to come in and say they're the worst thing in the world. That's the way social media has unfortunately devolved into, which is weird for me because I've been on the internet because, you know, I was an early adopter. I'm into technology. I remember being on AOL chats and stuff back in the day, and once in a blue moon you get one jackass to come into a message board or something and say something ignorant, and then everybody would kind of basically shun them out of there for being such an ass. But nowadays, it's like being an ass is a celebrated thing. So unfortunately, Omega had to deal with this. MJF also had to deal with this too when he was talking about, you know, in character, you know, took a picture of himself exercising, working out, and somebody said, oh, well, it's good to see that you admit that in AEW, a white guy can get over without having any real talent. And MJF then responds, of course, as we all know, his last name is Friedman, that he's Jewish. I mean, call me crazy. I do read history, but I think white supremacists have kind of a problem with Jewish people. I don't know if you've heard of the Nazis or skinheads, but whatever. It's just this stuff, like, there's such, and it's why I try to limit as much time as I can on Twitter. And sometimes you get sucked into the hole, but I'm not on it anywhere near as much as I used to be. I used to be on there for every wrestling show, and it's just gotten to the point where it's terrible. Now, I don't know where this is going. I think from the social media standpoint, and this, again, just extends beyond wrestling, at some point in time, especially if you're famous or somewhat famous, even on D-list celebrities like myself, you can go to, you want to go to Facebook and Twitter and go, look, I just want to promote my thing without having to get a bunch of hate every single time I say something. I just want to promote it to my fans and the people that like me. I don't really care to hear from these other people who are basically going to come and think of the most disgusting thing they can think of and hurl it at me. So I don't know, man. I think social media in the future, and you know, this is one of God knows how many millions of instances of this happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years we see posts and comments and tweets and stuff where somebody can turn off the commenting, turn off responses. So if you want to be Kenny Omega and you just want to say, hey, I really like this match on Saturday night, you don't have to listen to people calling you a pedophile. If you want to be MJF and you want to be in character and put over how great you are while you're working out by taking a selfie, you shouldn't have to hear somebody race bait you about something. If you're Big Swole and you post about what you think about AEW's practices, you shouldn't have white supremacists threatening you on Twitter. I think this is a big problem. It's been a problem for a very long time. And I think people like myself and a lot of other people are getting kind of tired of it. And it's either you're going to have to make these provisions or you're going to get a lot of influencers stop using your platforms or maybe use a new platform that doesn't allow for that stuff. Speaking of MJF and Twitter, though, something very interesting happened the other day. He was talking about getting paid for a meet and greet or whatever, and Baron Corbin, of all people from WWE, chimed in on his tweet. So apparently now the two of them are buddy-buddy, and they apparently are going to be having dinner together, and Corbin wants to rent out the place so the peasants don't bother them. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's one of the best interactions from two of the most, which is ironic, two of the most hated heels in their respective companies. MJF clearly the biggest heel in AEW, and Baron Corbin, Happy Corbin, I'm still not quite sure whether, I think he's a heel, but he's pretty high up there, and he's been up there. A lot of fans have not liked Baron Corbin since he was back in NXT for a very long time. So it's funny that the two of them managed to have the most civil and the most promising and the most normal, mentally normal, I should say, mentally well-adjusted interaction between two characters from AEW and WWE talking together. And I think that's pretty cool. And some news about some other wrestling companies. Ring of Honor is still in the news, and they've made an announcement recently, and Brian Alvarez was talking about this on Wrestling Observer Radio, that Ring of Honor is going to be focusing when they return in April, which is clearly now that they've got plans and they're moving ahead to returning in April. So thank God Ring of Honor is still going to be around. But one of the things that they have detailed is that they will only be focusing on 3 championships. So things like the 6-man tag titles and the Pure Championship, which I kind of like the concept of the Pure Championship. I think you kind of got to work your way towards it, though. I think just establishing it and going with the new rule system, because I like the rule system. I like all the ways you can play with it. I've had a concept before about having some new rules added to a wrestling, points, time limits, and all the other kind of stuff added to wrestling matches. But the Pure Championship, I think it was too much too fast. I think they could have worked their way towards it, but that apparently will be put on the back burner for the time being, and it appears that Ring of Honor is only going to focus on the Ring of Honor Men's Championship, the Women's Championship, and the Tag Team Championships. I think if you're restarting the brand too, I think that's probably a good idea. Just focus on the championships. They're basically going to be doing this as a traveling championship, which kind of encroaches a little bit on what NWA's concept is, but then again, NWA is changing some of their approach to wrestling in 2022. So it's the wrestling industry, as far as the outside of the two big boys in North America, AEW and WWE, seems to finally they're going to try to start doing some other new things and try to differentiate themselves from the two big companies, which, you know, AEW and WWE, they're relatively similar as far, because AEW does have a lot of sports entertainment to it. WWE is pure sports entertainment. AEW is like a mix of pro wrestling and sports entertainment, but places like the NWA and Ring of Honor are more pure pro wrestling shows, and I think seeing them differentiate themselves and distinguish themselves from the big sports entertainment companies might be a good thing, and might lead to not them ever beating AEW or WWE, but them at least being able to establish a profitable business, which at the end of the day is what all any of these secondary or third or fourth or fifth tier companies really need to do. PWG is back in the news, and it's been a long time since they've had the Battle of Los Angeles. As far as the indie scene is concerned, as far as the pro wrestling scene is concerned, it is one of the most looked forward to tournaments in North America. It's probably as close as we get to a G1 over here in the States. AEW has its tournaments and WWE has its tournaments, but I don't think any of them, for wrestling fans, for pro wrestling fans, has the prestige that the Battle of Los Angeles, or BOLA, has really achieved over the last decade. And they announced that instead of it being in summer this year, it's coming up in a couple of weeks here in January, And the show, remarkably, has sold out, almost instantly sold out. And they've already released the matches and the brackets for the first round of the tournament. In the first round, we got the PWG World Champion Bandito taking on Speedball Mike Bailey. Jonah taking on Buddy Matthews. That's going to be interesting. Aforementioned Ring of Honor World Champion John Gresham. It will be taking on Davey Richards. JD Drake will be taking on Black Taurus. Lee Moriarty will be taking on Alex Shelley. Been a long time since I've seen him wrestle. Jack Cartwheel will be taking on Leo Rush. Kevin Blackwood will be taking on Daniel Garcia. And Aramis will be taking on Ray Horace. If you're not familiar with the Battle of Los Angeles, again, it's a 2-day tournament. Usually it's a 3-day tournament. It's a 2-day tournament this year. And the winner usually is somebody who does get a big boost to their career. And so if you are a person who's in the regular pro wrestling industry and you're looking to go to a New Japan or a WWE or an AEW or something like that now, being in the Pro Wrestling Guerrillas Battle of Los Angeles tournament and making a good showing there and even winning it will probably get you booked in a lot of other places, which is why it's one of the major tournaments in North America during the year for any pro wrestling company. And finally, we have news on the viewership from this past Saturday's All Elite Wrestling Battle of the Belts. They had just over 700,000 viewers, which I'm actually kind of surprised that the number was that high because the card wasn't really striking anybody too much. However, it did. And that's with a card that didn't have, outside of Britt Baker and Sammy Guevara, any of their major league highly promoted talent. Now, you did have Matt Sydal taking on Ricky Starks for the FTW Championship. Starks did retain. Rio, of course, as we mentioned before, challenged Britt Baker for the AEW Women's Championship. Baker did retain. Had a nice little moment at the end with Jamie Hayter and Reba, not Rebel, whatever her name is. They had a nice little moment at the end where they finally seemed temporarily to have squashed their internal beef. And of course, you had Sammy Guevara taking on Dustin Rhodes, who was the replacement for Cody, to crown a new interim TNT championship. So Sammy Guevara, after losing the TNT title, has now won the TNT interim title, which of course will eventually lead once Cody is out of COVID protocol, because that was the reason Cody had to pull out of the show, because he and Brandy were exposed to a family member who had COVID, so they're quarantining, obviously. But once Cody is back and available, it looks like we are going to get a rematch between Cody and Sammy Guevara, the interim champion versus the existing champion, which I like the fact that AEW does that, because I'm not to mention other wrestling companies, and this is not just WWE, New Japan has this kind of issue too, is that when somebody goes out, they don't do what what boxing and mixed martial arts do, which is crown an interim champion, and then when the original champion returns, there's a match between the two of them to decide who's the real champion. That's not really done that often in pro wrestling. It's great to see that done here in AEW, and it seems like an easy storyline fix. If your champion can't make a show, to have a match for the interim championship, and then you get another main event going forward that people are going to want to see. So really cool for AEW. Another one of the things that they do that I kind of like with their bookings format. I don't like the fact that Battle of the Belts was only a 1-hour show, but I do think that had a lot to do with the fact that that was the same week that they were going to debut on TBS, and I think Battle of the Belts probably would have had the Danielson and Hangman Page match for the AEW Championship, and the tag team match with the Lucha Brothers. Actually, and the TNT title match. Actually, all the title matches we saw on Dynamite, I think if Battle of the Belts was a 2-hour special and it wasn't on the same week that they were debuting Dynamite on TBS, we probably would have seen all 6 of those titles defended. But and I think that was the original plan, because it seems like they were trying to book it that way and promote Battle of the Belts that way, but then they just kind of spread it out and called it Championship Week. But who knows? We'll see coming up in spring when the next Battle of the Belts happens, if it's going to be moved to a 2-hour show, or are they going to kind of keep the same 1-hour format with kind of not the world title and not the world tag titles, but with 3 titles split between the two. I'm not really sure. I would hope so, because Battle of the Belts, given the numbers that they did on Saturday, you might think they would go to TNT right now and say, hey, look, that was a condensed show. It's not what we originally planned. We still got 700,000 plus viewers on it. Imagine if we had actually really heavily promoted that and put some world title match on there, what the viewership would have been then. So I think they have a case to be made there, and I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully in the future we get an expanded, extended 2-hour version of Battle of the Belts coming up. I guess it would be in April or May. But I want to know what you guys think about these news stories. What do you think about Kenny Omega and MJF getting trolled? What do you think about MJF and Baron Corbin having dinner together? Ring of Honor's new title structure. Pro Wrestling Guerrilla selling out the Battle of Los Angeles tournament. And what did you think about the numbers this past week from AEW Battle of the Belts? Let me know. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Don't forget too that you can get some free goodies down in the description box below. You can get up to 2 free stocks, maybe a little bit more, from Webull by using the link down below. Those stocks could be worth anywhere up to $2,300, so it's essentially getting free money. If you just want to get the stocks and don't want to keep them, you can sell them and cash it out. Free money. All there for you down in the description box below. But until next time, I will see you guys here for more news, rumors, and commentary right here on the Rant and Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.